Welcome back to A Clock in the Journal. Loyalty is not spoken. Not in moments like these. It is proven. In silence. A look held too long. A step taken without question. There is no room for doubt. No time for explanation. Only trust, or its absence. He moves forward, knowing the risk is shared. Because in the dark, certainty fades. And what remains is something quieter. Something stronger. Not visible. Not declared, but felt, in every choice that cannot be undone. Chapter 10. My Raffles Right or Wrong. The historic sword had just been cleared for action when Raffles and I met at Lord's next day. I blushed to own I had been knave and fool enough to suggest that he should smuggle me into the pavilion. But perhaps the only laws of man that Raffles really respected were those of the MCC, and it was in Block B that he joined me a minute or so before 11. The sun was as strong and the sky as blue, as though the disastrous day before had been just such another, but its tropical shower bath had left the London air as cleanly and as clear as crystal. The neutral tints of every day were splashes of vivid color. The waiting umpires animated snowmen, the heap of sawdust at either end, a pyramid of powdered gold upon an emerald ground. And in the expectant hush before the appearance of the fielding side, I still recall the Yorkshire accent of the Surrey poet, hawking his latest lyric on some great stand by Mr. Webb and Mr. Stoddart, and incidentally assuring the crowd that Cambridge was going to win because everybody said Oxford would. "Just in time," said Raffles, as he sat down, and the Cambridge men emerged from the pavilion, capped and sashed in varying shades of light blue. The captain's colors were bleached by service, but the wicket-keepers were the newest and the bluest of the lot, and as a male historian I shrink from saying how well they suited him. "Teddy Garland looks as though nothing had happened," was what I said at the time, as I peered through my binocular at the padded figure with the pink face and the gigantic gloves. "That's because he knows there's a chance of nothing more happening," was the reply. "I've seen him and his poor old governor up here since I saw Dan Levy." I eagerly inquired as to the upshot of the earlier interview, but Raffles looked as though he had not heard. The Oxford captain had come out to open the innings with a player less known to fame. The first ball of the match hurtled down the pitch, and the Oxford captain left it severely alone. Teddy took it charmingly, and almost with the same movement the ball was back in the bowler's hands. "He's all right," muttered Raffles with a long breath. "So is our Mr. Shylock, Bunny. We fixed things up in no time after all. But the worst of it is, I shall only be able to stop." He broke off, mouth open, as it might have been mine. A ball had been driven hard to extra cover, and quite well fielded. Another had been taken by Teddy as competently as the first, but not returned to the bowler. The Oxford captain had played at it, and we heard something even in Block B. "How's that?" came almost simultaneously in Teddy's ringing voice. Up went the umpire's finger, and down came Raffles's hand upon my thigh. "He's caught him, Bunny!" he cried in my ear above the Cambridge cheers. "The best bat on either side, and Teddy's out at him third ball." He stopped to watch the defeated captain's slow return, the demonstration on the pitch in Teddy's honor. Then he touched me on the arm and dropped his voice. "He's forgotten all his troubles now, Bunny, if you like. Nothing's going to worry him till lunch, unless he misses a sitting chance. And he won't, you'll see. A good start means even more behind the sticks than in front of him." Raffles was quite right. Another wicket fell cheaply in another way. Then came a long spell of plucky cricket, a stand not masterly but dogged and judicious, in which many a ball outside the off stump was allowed to pass unmolested, and a few were unfortunate in just beating the edge of the bat. On the tricky wicket, Teddy's work was cut out for him, and beautifully he did it. It was a treat to see his lithe form crouching behind the bails, to rise next instant with the rising ball. His great gloves were always in the right place, always adhesive. Once only he held them up prematurely, and a fine ball brushed the wicket on its way for 4 byes. It was his sole error all the morning. Raffles sat enchanted, so in truth did I, but between the overs I endeavored to obtain particulars of his latest parley with Dan Levy, and once or twice extracted a stray detail. The old sinner has a place on the river, Bunny, though I have my suspicions of a second establishment nearer town. But I'm to find him at his lawful home all the next few nights and sitting up for me till 2 in the morning. Then you're going to Gray's Inn Square this week? I'm going there this morning for a peep at the crib. There's no time to be lost, but on the other hand, there's a devil of a lot to learn. I say, Bunny, there's going to be another change of bowling, the fast stuff too, by Jove. A massive youth had taken the ball at the top end, and the wicket-keeper was retiring to a more respectful distance behind the stumps. You'll let me know when it's to be? I whispered, but Raffles only answered, I wonder Jack Studley didn't wait till there was more of a crust on the mud pie. That tripe's no use without a fast wicket. The technical slang of the modern cricket field is ever a weariness. At the moment it was something worse, and I resigned myself to the silent contemplation of as wild an over as ever was bowled at Lord's. A shocking thing to the off was sent skipping past point for 4. Tripe, muttered Raffles to himself. A very good one went over the bails and thud into Garland's gloves like a round shot. Well bowled, said Raffles with less reserve. Another delivery was merely ignored, both at the wicket and at my side, and then came a high full pitch to leg, which the batsman hit hard but very late. It was a hit that might have smashed the pavilion palings, but it never reached them. It stuck in Teddy's left glove instead, and none of us knew it till we saw him staggering towards long leg and tossing up the ball as he recovered balance. That's the worst ball that ever took a wicket in this match, vowed a reverend veteran as the din died down. And the best catch, cried Raffles. Come on, Bunny, that's my nunc dimittis for the day. There would be nothing to compare with it if I could stop to see every ball bowled, and I mustn't see another. But why? I asked, as I followed Raffles into the press behind the carriages. I've already told you why, said he. I got as close to him as one could in that crowd. You're not thinking of doing it tonight, AJ? I don't know. But you'll let me know? Not if I can help it, Bunny. Didn't I promise not to drag you any further through this particular mire? But if I can help you, I whispered, after a momentary separation in the throng. Oh, if I can't get on without you, said Raffles, not nicely. I'll let you know fast enough, but do drop the subject now. Here come old Garland and Camilla Belsize. They did not see us quite so soon as we saw them, and for a moment one felt a spy. But it was an interesting moment, even to a person smarting from a snub. The ruined man looked haggard, ill, unfit to be about, the very embodiment of the newspaper report concerning him. But the spirit beamed through the shrinking flesh. The poor old fellow was alight with pride and love, exultant in spite of himself and his misfortunes. He had seen his boy's great catch. He had heard the cheers. He would hear them till his dying hour. Camilla Belsize had also seen and heard, but not with the same exquisite appreciation. Cricket was a game to her. It was not that quintessence and epitome of life it would seem to be to some of its devotees, and real life was pressing so heavily upon her that the trivial consolation which had banished her companion's load could not lighten hers. So at least I thought as they approached, the man so worn and radiant, the girl so pensive for all her glorious youth and beauty. His was the old head bowed with sorrow, his also the simpler and the younger heart. That catch will console me for a lot, I heard him say quite heartily to Raffles. But Camilla's comment was altogether perfunctory. Indeed, I wondered that so sophisticated a person did not affect some little enthusiasm. She seemed more interested, however, in the crowd than in the cricket. And that was usual enough. Raffles was already saying he must go, with an explanatory murmur to Mr. Garland, who clasped his hand with a suddenly clouded countenance. But Miss Belsize only bowed, and scarcely took her eyes off a couple of outwardly inferior men, who had attracted my attention through hers, until they also passed out of the ground. Mr. Garland was on tiptoes, watching the game again with mercurial ardor. "Mr. Manders will look after me," she said to him. "Won't you, Mr. Manders?" I made some suitable asseveration, and she added, "Mr. Garland's a member, you know, and dying to go into the pavilion." "Only just to hear what they think of Teddy," the poor old boy confessed. and when we had arranged where to meet in the interval, away he hurried with his keen, worn face. Miss Belsize turned to me the moment he was gone. "I want to speak to you, Mr. Manders," she said quickly, but without embarrassment. "Where can we talk? And watch as well?" I suggested, thinking of the young man at his best behind the sticks. "I want to speak to you first," she said, "where we shan't be overheard. It's about Mr. Raffles," added Miss Belsize as she met my stare. About Raffles again. About Raffles, after all that she had learnt the day before. I did not enjoy the prospect, as I led the way past the ivy-mantled tennis court of those days to the practice ground, turned for the nonce into a tented lawn. "And what about Raffles?" I asked as we struck out for ourselves across the grass. "I'm afraid he's in some danger," replied Miss Belsize. And she stopped in her walk and confronted me as frankly as though we had the animated scene to ourselves. "Danger," I repeated, guiltily enough, no doubt. "What makes you think that, Miss Belsize?" My companion hesitated for the first time. "You won't tell him I told you, Mr. Manders?" "Not if you don't want me to," said I, taken aback more by her manner than by the request itself. "You promise me that?" "Certainly." "Then tell me, did you notice two men who passed close to us just after we had all met?" "There are so many men to notice," said I to gain time, "but these were not the sort one expects to see here today." "Did they wear bowlers and short coats?" "You did notice them." "Only because I saw you watching them," said I, recalling the whole scene. "They wanted watching," rejoined Miss Belsize dryly. "They followed Mr. Raffles out of the ground." "So they did," I reflected aloud in my alarm. "They were following you both when you met us." "The dickens they were! Was that the first you saw of them?" "No, the first time was over there at the nets before play began. I noticed those two men behind Teddy's net. They were not watching him. That called my attention to them. It's my belief they were lying in wait for Mr. Raffles. At any rate, when he came, they moved away. But they followed us afterwards across the ground." "You are sure of that?" "I looked around to see," said Miss Belsize, avoiding my eyes for the first time. "Did you think the men detectives?" And I forced a laugh. "I was afraid they might be, Mr. Manders, though I have never seen one off the stage. Still," I pursued with painfully sustained amusement, "you were ready to find A.J. Raffles being shadowed here at Lord's of all places in the world?" "I was ready for anything, anywhere," said Miss Belsize, "after all I heard yesterday afternoon." "You mean about poor Mr. Garland and his affairs?" It was an ingenuously disingenuous suggestion. It brought my companion's eyes back to mine, with something of the scorn that I deserved. "No, Mr. Manders, I meant after what we all heard between Mr. Levy and Mr. Raffles, and you knew very well what I meant," added Miss Belsize severely. "But surely you didn't take all that seriously?" said I, without denying the just impeachment. "How could I help it? The insinuation was serious enough, in all conscience," exclaimed Camilla Belsize. "That is," said I, since she was not to be willfully misunderstood, "that poor old Raffles had something to do with this jewel robbery at Carlsbad." "If it was a robbery," she winced at the word. "Do you mean it might have been a trick?" said I, recalling the victim's own make-believe at the Albany. And not only did Camilla appear to embrace that theory with open arms, she had the nerve to pretend that it really was what she had meant. "Obviously," says she, with an impromptu superiority worthy of Raffles himself. "I wonder you never thought of that, Mr. Manders, when you know what a trick you both played Mr. Levy only yesterday. Mr. Raffles himself told us all about that, and I'm very grateful to you both. You must know I am, for Teddy's sake," added Miss Belsize, with one quick, remorseful glance towards the great arena. "Still, it only shows what Mr. Raffles is, and it's what I meant when we were talking about him yesterday." "I don't remember," said I, remembering fast enough. "In the rockery," she reminded me, "when you asked what people said about him, And I said that about living on his wits and being a paid amateur. But the other was the worst. I'm not so sure, said I. But his wits wouldn't carry him very far if he only took necklaces and put them back again. But it was all a joke, she reminded us both with a bit of a start. It must have been a joke if Mr. Raffles did it at all. And it would be dreadful if anything happened to him because of a wretched practical joke. There was no mistake about her feeling now. She really felt that it would be dreadful if anything happened to the man whom yesterday she had seemed both to dislike and to distrust. Her voice vibrated with anxiety. A bright film covered the fine eyes, and they were finer than ever as they continued to face me unashamed. But I was fool enough to speak my mind, and at that they flashed themselves dry. I thought you didn't like him, had been my remark, and who says I do, was hers. But he has done a lot for Teddy, she went on, and never more than yesterday, with her hand for an instant on my arm, when you helped him. I am dreadfully sorry for Mr. Garland, sorrier than I am for poor Teddy. But Mr. Raffles is more than sorry. I know he means to do what he can. He seems to think there must be something wrong. He spoke of bringing that brute to reason, if not to justice. It would be too dreadful if such a creature could turn the tables on Mr. Raffles by trumping up any charge against him. There was an absolute echo of my own tone in trumping up any charge, and I thought the echo sounded even more insincere, but at least it showed me where we were. Miss Belsize was not deceived. She only wanted me to think she was. Miss Belsize had divined what I knew, but neither of us would admit to the other that the charge against Raffles would be true enough. But why should these men follow him, said I, really wondering why they should. If there were anything definite against old Raffles, don't you think he would be arrested? Oh, I don't know, was the slightly irritable answer. I only think he should be warned that he is being followed. Whatever he has done, I ventured. Yes, said she, whatever he has done. After what he did for Teddy yesterday. You want me to warn him? Yes, but not from me. And suppose he really did take Mrs. Levy's necklace. That's just what we are supposing. But suppose it wasn't for a joke at all. I spoke as one playfully plumbing the abysmally absurd. What I did desire to sound was the loyalty of this new, unexpected, and still captious ally. And I thought myself strangely successful at the first cast. For Miss Belsize looked me in the face as I was looking her, and I trusted her before she spoke. Well, after yesterday, she said, I should warn him all the same. You would back your Raffles right or wrong? I murmured, perceiving that Camilla Belsize was, after all, like all the rest of us, against a vulgar extortioner, most decidedly, she returned, without repudiating the possessive pronoun. It doesn't follow that I think anything of him, apart from what you did between you for Teddy yesterday. We had continued our stroll some time ago, and now it was I who stood still. I looked at my watch. It still wanted some minutes to the luncheon interval. If Raffles took a cab to his rooms, I said, he must be nearly there and I must telephone to him. Is there a call office on the ground? Only in the pavilion, I believe, for the use of the members. Then you must go to the nearest one outside. And what about you? Miss Belsize brightened with her smile of perfect and unconscious independence. Oh, I shall be all right, she said. I know where to find Mr. Garland, even if I don't pick up an escort on the way. But it was she who escorted me to the tall turnstile nearest Wellington Road. And you do see why I want to put Mr. Raffles on his guard? She said pointedly as we shook hands. It's only because you and he have done so much for Teddy. And because she did not end by reminding me of my promise, I was all the more reluctantly determined to keep it to the letter, even though Raffles should think as ill as ever of one who was at least beginning to think better of him. Chapter 11. A Dash in the Dark. In a few lines which I found waiting for me at the club, and have somewhat imprudently preserved, Raffles professes to have known he was being shadowed even before we met at Lord's. But it was no use talking about it until the foe were in the cart. He goes on to explain the simple means by which he reduced the gentleman in billycocks to the pitch of discomfiture implied in his metaphor. He had taken a hansom to the Burlington Gardens entrance to the Albany, and kept it waiting while he went in and changed his clothes. Then he had sent Barraclaw to pay off the cab, and himself marched out into Piccadilly, what time the billycock brims were still shading watchful eyes in Burlington Gardens. There, to be sure, I myself had spotted one of the precious pair when I drove up after vain exertions at the call-office outside Lord's. But by that time his confederate was on guard at the Piccadilly end, and Raffles had not only shown a clean pair of wings, but left the poor brutes to watch an empty cage. He dismisses them not unfairly with the epithet amateurish. Thus I was the more surprised, but not the less relieved, to learn that he was running down into the country for the weekend, to be out of their way, but he would be back on the Monday night. To keep an engagement you wot of, Bunny. And if you like, you may meet me under the clock at Waterloo, in flannel kit and tennis shoes for choice, at the witching hour of 12 sharp, if I liked. I had a premature drink in honor of an invitation more gratifying to my vanity than any compliment old Raffles had paid me yet, for I could still hear his ironical undertaking to let me know if he could not do without me, and there was obviously no irony in this delightfully early intimation of that very flattering fact. It altered my whole view of the case. I might disapprove of the risks Raffles was running for his other friends, but the more I was allowed to share in them, the less critical I was inclined to be. Besides, I was myself clearly implicated in the issue as between my own friend and the common enemy. It was no more palatable to me than it was to Raffles, to be beaten by Dan Levy after our initial victory over him. So I drank like a man to his destruction, and subsequently stole forth to spy upon his foolish myrmidons, who flattered themselves that they were spying on Raffles. The imbeciles were at it still. The one hanging about Burlington Gardens looked unutterably bored, but with his blots of whisker and his grimy jowl, as flagrant a detective officer as ever I saw, even if he had not so considerately dressed the part. The other bruiser was an equally distinctive type, with a formidable fighting face and a chest like a barrel. But in Piccadilly he seemed to me less occupied in taking notice than in avoiding it. In innocuous futility one could scarcely excel the other, and between them they raised my spirits to the zenith. I spent the rest of the afternoon at their own game, dogging Miss Belsize about Lord's, until at last I had an opportunity of informing her that Raffles was quite safe. It may be that I made my report with too much gusto when my chance came. At any rate, it was only the fact that appeared to interest Miss Belsize. The details, over which I gloated, seemed to inspire in her a repugnance consistent with the prejudice she had displayed against Raffles yesterday, but not with her grateful solicitude on his behalf as revealed to me that very morning. I could only feel that gratitude was the beginning and the end of her new regard for him. Raffles had never fascinated this young girl as he did the rest of us. Ordinarily engaged to an ordinary man, she was proof against the glamour that dazzled us. Nay, though she would not admit it even to me, his friend, though like Levy she pretended to embrace the theory of the practical joke, making it the pretext for her anxiety, I felt more certain than ever that she now guessed, and had long suspected, what manner of man Raffles really was, and that her natural antipathy was greater even than before. Still more certain was I that she would never betray him by word or deed, that, whatever harm might come of his present proceedings, it would not be through Camilla Belsize. But I was now determined to do my own utmost, to minimize the dangers, to be a real help to Raffles in the act of altruistic depravity to which he had committed himself, and not merely a fifth wheel to his dashing chariot. Accordingly, I went into solemn training for the event before us, a Turkish bath on the Saturday, a quiet Sunday between Mount Street and the club, and most of Monday lying like a log in cold-blooded preparation for the night's work. And when night fell, I took it upon me to reconnoiter the ground myself before meeting Raffles at Waterloo. Another cool and starry evening seemed to have tempted all the town and his wife into the streets. The great streams of traffic were busier than ever, the backwaters emptier, and Gray's Inn a basin drained to the last dreg of visible humanity. In one moment, I passed through gateway and alley from the voices and lights of Holborn into a perfectly deserted square of bare ground and bright stars. The contrast was altogether startling, for I had never been there before, but for the same reason I had already lost my bearings, believing myself to be in Gray's Inn Square when I was only in South Square, Gray's Inn. Here I entered upon a hopeless search for the offices of Burroughs and Burroughs. Door after door had I tried in vain, and was beginning to realize my mistake, when a stray molecule of the population drifted in from Holborn as I had done, but with the quick step of the man who knows his way. I darted from a doorway to inquire mine, but he was across the square before I could cut him off, and as he passed through the rays of a lamp beside a second archway, I fell back thanking Providence and Raffles for my rubber soles. The man had neither seen nor heard me, but at the last moment I had recognized him as the burlier of the two blockheads who had shadowed Raffles 3 days before. He passed under the arch without looking round. I flattened myself against the wall on my side of the arch, and in so standing I was all but eyewitness of a sudden encounter in the square beyond. The quick steps stopped, and there was a "Here you are" on one side and a "Well, where is he?" on the other, both very eager and below the breath. "On the job," whispered the first voice. "Up to the neck." "When did he go in?" "Nearly an hour ago, when I sent the messenger." "Which way?" "Up through number 17. "Next door, eh?" "That's right." "Over the roof?" "Can't say. He's left no tracks." "I've been up to see." "I suppose there's the usual ladder and trap door?" "Yes, but the ladder's hanging in its proper place. He couldn't have put it back there, could he?" The other grunted. Presently he expressed a doubt whether Raffles, and it thrilled me to hear the very name, had succeeded in breaking into the lawyer's office at all. The first man on the scene, however, was quite sure of it, and so was I. "And we've got to hang about," grumbled the newcomer, "till he comes out again." "That's it. We can't miss him. He must come back into the square, or through into the gardens, and if he does that he'll have to come over these here railings into Field Court. We got him either way, and there's a step just here where we can sit and see both ways, as though it had been made for us. You come and try, a door into the old hall." That was all I heard distinctly. First their footsteps, and then the few extra yards, made the rest unintelligible. But I had heard enough. "The usual ladder and trap door." Those blessed words alone might prove worth their weight in great letters of solid gold. Now I could breathe again. Now I relaxed my body and turned my head, and peered through the arch with impunity, and along the whole western side of Gray's Inn Square, with its dusky fringe of plane trees and its vivid line of lamps, its strip of pavement, and its wall of many windowed houses under one unbroken roof. Dim lights smoldered in the column of landing windows over every door. Otherwise there was no break in the blackness of that gaunt facade. Yet in some dark room or other behind those walls I seemed to see Raffles at work as plainly as I had just heard our natural enemies plotting his destruction. I saw him at a safe. I saw him at a desk. I saw him leaving everything as he had found it, only to steal down and out into the very arms of the law. And I felt that even that desperate denouement was little more than he deserved for letting me think myself accessory before the fact, when all the time he meant me to have nothing whatever to do with it. Well, I should have everything to do with it now. If Raffles was to be saved from the consequences of his own insanity, I and I alone must save him. It was the chance of my life to show him my real worth, and yet the difficulty of the thing might have daunted Raffles himself. I knew what to do if only I could gain the house which he had made the base of his own operations. At least I knew what to attempt, and what Raffles had done I might do. So far the wily couple within earshot had helped me out of their own mouths, but they were only just round the corner that hid them from my view. Stray words still reached me, and they knew me by sight, would recognize me at a glance, might pounce upon me as I passed. Unless I had it. The crowd in Holborn seemed strange and unreal as I jostled in its midst once more. I was out of it in a moment, however, and into a bus and out of the bus in a couple of minutes by my watch. One more minute and I was seeing how far back I could sit in a hansom bound for Gray's Inn Square. I forget the number, I had told the cabman, but it's 3 or 4 doors beyond Burrows and Burrows, the solicitors. The gate into Holborn had to be opened for me, but the gatekeeper had not seen me on my previous entrance and exit afoot through the postern. It was when we drove under the further arch into the actual square that I pressed my head hard against the back of the hansom and turned my face towards Field Court. The enemy might have abandoned their position. They might meet me face to face as I landed on the pavement. That was my risk, and I ran it without disaster. We passed the only house with an outer door to it in the square. Now there is none, and on the plate beside it I read Burrows and Burrows with a thrill. Up went my stick. My shilling, with a peculiarly superfluous 6pence for luck, I thrust through the trap with the other hand, and I was across the pavement and on the stairs 4 clear doors beyond the lawyer's office before the driver had begun to turn his horse. They were broad bare stairs, with great office doors right and left on every landing, and in the middle the landing window looking out into the square. I waited well within the window on the first floor, and as my hansom drove out under the arch, the light of its near lamp flashed across 2 figures lounging on the steps of that entrance to the hall. But there was no stopping or challenging the cabman, no sound at all but those of hoofs and bell, and soon only that of my own heart beating as I fled up the rest of the stairs in my rubber soles. Near the top I paused to thank my kindly stars. Sure enough, there was a long step-ladder hanging on a great nail over the last half landing, and a square trap-door right over the landing proper. I ran up just to see the names on the 2 top doors. One was evidently that of some pettifogging firm of solicitors, while the other bespoke a private resident, whom I judged to be out of town by the congestion of postal matter that met my fingers in his letterbox. Neither had any terrors for me. The step-ladder was unhooked without another moment's hesitation. Care alone was necessary to place it in position without making a noise. Then up I went, and up went the trapdoor next, without mishap or hindrance, until I tried to stand up in the loft, and caught my head a crack against the tiles instead. This was disconcerting in more ways than one, for I could not leave the ladder where it was, and it was nearly twice my height. I struck a match and lit up a sufficient perspective of lumber and cobwebs to reassure me. The loft was long enough, and the trapdoor plumb under the apex of the roof, whereas I had stepped sideways off the ladder. It was to be got up, and I got it up, though not by any means as silently as I could have wished. I knelt and listened at the open trapdoor for a good minute, before closing it with great caution, a squeak and a scuttle in the loft itself being the only sign that I had disturbed a living creature. There was a grimy dormer window, not looking down into the square, but leading like a companion hatchway into a valley of once red tiles, now stained blue-black in the starlight. It was great to stand upright here in the pure night air out of sight of man or beast. Smokeless chimney stacks deleted whole pages of stars, but put me more in mind of pollards rising out of these rigid valleys and sprouting with telephone wires that interlaced for foliage. The valley I was in ended fore and aft in a similar slope to that at either side. The length of it doubtless tallied with the frontage of a single house, and when I had clambered over the southern extremity into a precisely similar valley, I saw that this must be the case. I had entered the 4th house beyond Burrows and Burrows's, or was it the 5th? I threaded 3 valleys, and then I knew. In all 3 there had been dormer windows on either hand, that on the square side leading into the loft, the other, or others, forming a sort of skylight to some top-floor room. Suddenly I struck one of these standing very wide open, and trod upon a rope's end, curled like a snake on the leads. I stooped down, and at a touch I knew that I had hold of Raffles's favorite manila, which united a silken flexibility with the strength of any hawser. It was tied to the window post, and it dangled into a room in which there was a dull red glow of fire, an inhabited room if ever I put my nose in one. My body must follow, however, where Raffles had led the way, and when it did I came to ground sooner than I expected on something less secure. The dying firelight, struggling through the bars of a kitchen range, showed my tennis shoes in the middle of the kitchen table. A cat was stretching itself on the hearthrug as I made a step of a wooden chair and came down like a cat myself. I found the kitchen door, found a passage so dark that the window at the end hung like a picture slashed across the middle, yet it only looked into the square, for I peered out when I had crept along the passage and even thought I both heard and saw the enemy at their old post, but I was in another enemy's country now. At every step I stopped to listen for the thud of feet bounding out of bed. Hearing nothing, I had the temerity at last to strike a match upon my trousers, and by its light I found the outer door. This was not bolted nor yet shut. It was merely ajar, and so I left it. The rooms opposite appeared to be an empty set. Those on the second and first floors were only partially shut off by swing doors, leading to different departments of the mighty offices of Burroughs and Burroughs. There were no lights upon these landings, and I gathered my information by means of successive matches, whose telltale ends I carefully concealed about my person, and from copious legends painted on the walls. Thus I had little difficulty in groping my way to the private offices of Sir John Burroughs, head of the celebrated firm. But I looked in vain for a layer of light under any of the massive mahogany doors with which this portion of the premises was glorified. Then I began softly trying doors that proved to be locked. Only one yielded to my hand, and when it was a few inches open, all was still black. But the next few brought me to the end of my quest and the close of my solitary adventures.